to stop it. It's really, really good. We're going to be playing some more songs from that recording session. It was a few years ago by Josh Warshawski and friends. That particular song, I think he composed all those melodies. That one is Hameir. So it's that section in the morning prayers between the Baruch Hu and the blessings of the Shema. And it's all about the creation, right? So it's in compassion, he, the Lord, gives light to the earth, or he illuminates the earth and all its inhabitants, and in his goodness continually renews the work of creation day after day. It's about a 6-minute song, and it will get you moving. Josh Warshawski did a beautiful, beautiful job with that recording. And I want to share some more recordings from that session with you. All right. Let me just turn that off. Nina is doing some, school bus driving the kids around today. So I'm on my own. I'm sharing the show into our groups and getting set up. I think I'm all together. And I'm not going to forget to light up the darkness. Let's do it. Okay, who is with us? We've got a really interesting show today, about Mezuzah. The topic came up yesterday. It's going to be continued today. We had a question at the end of yesterday. Okay, I understand. For various reasons, mezuzahs are not needed in most locations on the Temple Mount, only by rabbinic decree on that room where the high priest, when the temple was standing, would lodge for 7 days, or he was sequestered for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur. But what about synagogues? Are synagogues obligated in the mitzvah mezuzah? We will be talking about that today. Who is with us as we get it going on a Thursday night with Shabbat just around the corner? And let me just say right away, Michael Stein wrote in yesterday and he said, Sal, I love what you do. I love what you're teaching. I love being a member of the class, but you gotta stop saying Yom Kippur. Because in my 75 years, says Michael Stein, I was told repeatedly it's Yom Kippur, same root like Purim. And so, it's just sloppy to say Yom Kippur. Okay, Michael, you're right. Thank you for telling me, for reminding me. And as we talk about the laws of Yom Kippur, I will be sure to say Yom Kippur as often as I can. And with God's help, I'll make it a good and permanent habit. All right. Who is with us tonight? James in Indianapolis, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Rebecca in LA. Paul in Chicago, Bill in Berkeley, Tom in Pennsylvania, Pauline in Arkansas, Renee in Indianapolis, Elvis in Geneva, Ann in Merced, Nancy in North Carolina, Arnold in Northridge, Nancy in Cape Canaveral, PK in Colorado, Jill in Illinois, Gail in Virginia, Lindsay in Cincinnati, Paul in the Great Northwest, Hillary in Cincinnati, where to go? Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey. Tom enjoyed the music. PK, can you find these songs in your store? We don't have a way of transmitting music, but we really do have to start getting, I've been meaning to do this, just have a list of the links. Most of the songs that I play during the timer, the countdown at the beginning of AT Daily, are available on YouTube. Definitely Josh Warshawski is. And I always try to link, at least to tag them on their Facebook page. When I go back, at the end of each show, I'll go back and put in a few of the topics that we covered to make these videos a little bit searchable when people Google for these subjects. And I always try to tag the singer if they have a Facebook presence. So there'll be a link to Josh Warshawski's page after the show. Paul, and never forget to light up the darkness. Amen. Ham is with us from Sacramento, Kristen in Cleveland, Yehudit in South Carolina. And over there on the YouTube side, let's see if I can get it going on the YouTube side. Here we go. We've got Neil in Virginia and Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. Let me get arranged. Okay, so we're going to be talking on today's daf quite a bit about mezuzahs and their placement and which houses and buildings and people, or rather, depending on the owner of the building, which houses and buildings require a mezuzah. But before we get to that, as I said, I always want to share a short Torah thought at the beginning of the class. And so today, we have a Torah portion every week. Sometimes we have a double Torah portion like this week, Acharei Kedoshim. So what happens is if you have a Torah portion of the week, and on Shabbos, we always have 7 aliyahs. So we divide the Torah portion into 7 parts, and then 7 people are called to make a blessing each time that the Torah reader reads one of those aliyahs in synagogue on Saturday morning. So you've got so every Torah portion is always divided into 7 parts for the reading in synagogue on Shabbos. But what that means is you can assign 1/7 approximately, because they vary in length depending on where the sages thought to divide them. But basically there's an aliyah for every day of the year, right? So a Torah portion has a week, 7 days in the week, 7 aliyahs. So today's reading is from Torah portion Kedoshim, the holinesses, things that are holy, people that are holy, right? And I mean, there's so many beautiful laws in this parsha, in this Torah portion, and specifically today. I was really, I always like to try to read that day's aliyah after my morning davening, after my morning prayers. And today I just got stuck there because there was so much to think about and dwell on before getting back into the rest of the day. So I can't even share all the teachings just from today's reading, but we're just going to cover 2 at the beginning, and maybe we'll start working our way through this aliyah over a few day period. So from today's aliyah, we have, and so this is at Leviticus 19 verses 14 through 16 we'll be talking about today. First of all, you must not carry out a corruption of justice. You must not give special consideration in judgment to a poor person, nor give respect in judgment to a great person. You shall judge your fellow man justly. Now, what that means is, of course, you should take special consideration of the poor, the disenfranchised, the needy, and you should support them if they need it with tzedakah, with charity. But when a poor person and a rich person, or somebody who's had other problems in life, comes up against someone in a trial, some kind of a lawsuit, so that's not the forum to try to impose justice for other considerations in the lives of the litigants, right? When the litigants come before the court on a specific issue, the job of the court, the job of the Beis Din, the rabbis who are administering this trial, is to rule on the issue that is before the court and not these other considerations, right? Because if you start to say to yourself, well, I think that this litigant, his case is not very good, but look at his situation in life. He deserves the mercy of the court in the battle between, in this litigation. So that is a transgression. It's a serious transgression. It's a corruption of justice for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that judges will disagree with each other on, what is the equity, what are the equities involved of these people. If you start, judging cases based on who you think is more deserving rather than the facts and merits of the case itself before you, you're going to have a totally inconsistent legal system, and the nation without a robust and sturdy and consistent legal system will not last. I mean, that is just a good intentions and a path to destruction. That was the first teaching of this aliyah. The one that I was really drawn to share with you is 19:16, Leviticus 19:16. It's a commandment from God. You must not go around as a gossip monger among your people. Some will translate that as a talebearer. That's from the Chabad translation in the weekly publication Chayenu. If we look at the Stone Chumash, the Art Scroll translation of the same verse, you shall not be a gossip monger among your people. And it's part of the same verse. You shall not be a gossip monger among your people. You shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. I am Hashem, or I am the Eternal. So it's actually the same verse. You shall not be a gossip monger among your people, and you shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. So there's just a lot to learn there. But on this question is, what does it mean to be a gossip monger, right? So we know that Lashon Hara, evil speech, wicked speech, evil tongue is a specific translation of that. Talking about people behind their back, peddling in gossip. It's not just poor form. It's not just poor etiquette. It is a sin at a biblical level. It is a Torah law that you don't gossip about other people. Says Rashi on this verse. Now, this is Rashi speaking, the great French medieval commentator. Rashi, I say that because all those who sow discord among people and who speak slander, they go to their friends' houses to spy out what bad things they can see or what bad things they can hear there in order to tell about it in the street. And therefore they are called, by Rashi's translation, people who go about spying. It's a spiritual lesson. When you get in the habit of talking about other people, right? Getting your friend's attention, you're considered an entertaining speaker when you share gossip, because everyone's attention is drawn to gossip. It's the cheapest and easiest way to get attention for yourself in a conversation, but it is the cheapest and worst way, and it is a sinful way to attract attention to yourself. And not only that, but when you start, peddling that sin, when you start trucking in that sin, as it were, Rashi's telling us is you get addicted to having gossip, what to share with the people so that you can keep attracting attention to yourself. And then when you don't have gossip handy, you will go look for it, right? You'll go spying on your friends and neighbors in order to gather that ammunition, that gossip that you can go share with other people. And then once you get them involved in a conversation, you'll probably bring gossip from that group back to the people you were gossiping on in the first place. It's a terrible, terrible state of affairs. And here we have a comment in the Art Scroll that the reason that you shall not be a gossip monger is tied in the same verse to you shall not stand idly by and watch the bloodshed of your fellow, is that you will cause bloodshed. Being a gossip monger ultimately leads to fights, discord, and even violence among the parties involved, the ones who are libeled and slandered by your gossip. So let's not forget, gossiping is a biblical level sin. Don't do it. We learned that from today's Aliyah. Okay, let's get to our daf, our Talmud page today. Here we are. All right. Whoops. Hold on. Okay. We are on Daf Yud Aleph, page 11, here in Tractate Yoma, the laws of Yom Kippur. We're still dealing with the commentary on the first Mishnah in chapter 1, the idea that the high priest is sequestered for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur, both to keep him away from sources of ritual impurity and to prepare him in sanctity for his encounter with the divine presence within the Holy of Holies, on the day of Yom Kippur. And that, by the way, the laws of Yom Kippur are also part of this week's Torah portion. And this idea that one of the main ideas there is that Aaron will not at all times, meaning at will, enter the Holy of Holies. That is a sacred place. You can only enter there once a year, and he has to be prepared for that. So that's what we've been learning. And as we saw yesterday, they put a mezuzah on the doorway of that chamber of the Parhedron where the high priest, where the Kohen Gadol resides for those 7 days before Yom Kippur. Of course, this is only when the temple was standing. These are laws that we have not been able to fulfill since the temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago, but we do our best to fulfill those obligations by studying them. Okay, so apropos of why do we put a mezuzah on his chamber? By rabbinic decree, because mezuzahs are not required on the Temple Mount. What is a mezuzah? It's a scroll, a handwritten scroll by a scribe that contains the words, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your resources. And these words which I command you on this day shall be upon your heart. And that paragraph ends with, about these words, you shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. And every Jewish home is required to have a mezuzah on its main entrance and all of the doorways inside the residence, doorways and archways, except, for example, a doorway to the bathroom. And we'll see today why you don't put a mezuzah on the door to a bathroom. But those are residences. And at the end of yesterday, someone asked in the comments, so, why are there mezuzahs on synagogues? Right, there usually is a mezuzah on a synagogue, but that is a publicly owned building. It's not owned by an individual. It's not a residence. So it's not obligated in mezuzah. Why do we usually find a mezuzah on a synagogue? And I said, I believe, and I was correct, I'm glad, and we'll be talking about it more today, that ultimately that became a custom, often because synagogues did have a person living there, the caretaker, in which case it became a residence. But even if no one lived there, it's really more of a custom, and it's an important teaching tool so that people understand the laws of mezuzah. We'll ask this question so we can talk about it. But otherwise, it would not be obligated. It's more of a custom that formed to have a mezuzah on a synagogue. More about that now. Hold on. Let me get started here. Okay, so apropos the mezuzah in the high priest's chamber, the Gemara discusses other laws of mezuzah. The sages taught with regard to the verse, and you will write and by the way, the mezuzah is the scroll inside. Sometimes people who don't have a lot of experience in this field get a little confused, and what they call the mezuzah, sometimes very beautiful, decorative box that the scroll sits inside, that's really the mezuzah covering. The mezuzah is the scroll inside. If it's in an outdoor location, it should be a waterproof mezuzah covering. And mezuzahs need to be checked twice in every 7 years. If something happens inside and the paper gets rotten or wilted or the ink runs or something like that, then that mezuzah has to be replaced. And they're not cheap. Mezuzahs are not cheap because they are handwritten. So the sages taught with regard to the verse at Deuteronomy 6:9, and you will write them upon the doorposts of your houses and upon your gates. With regard to the gates of houses and the gates of courtyards and the gates of cities and the gates of towns, all of them are obligated in the mitzvah, in the commandment of mezuzah in that place, due to the fact that it is stated, and you will write them upon the doorposts of your houses and upon your gates. So you might have thought it's only the gate of a private residence that would require the mezuzah, but now we see that a city that has a lot of Jews in it and that is a walled-in city, that the gates of the city require a mezuzah, if it's a walled-in city, so that gate is an actual entrance to the city. And, for example, if you visit Jerusalem, and you go to the Jaffa Gate, a very important, popular gate for entering the old city of Jerusalem. There's a beautiful, large mezuzah covering there made out of some kind of hard metal, and you can be sure that there is a scroll inside there. So that's the gate of a city. Abaye said to Rav Safra, if there is an obligation to affix a mezuzah on city gates, with regard to those city gates of Mezuzah, a city that has a Jewish majority, what is the reason that the sages did not affix a mezuzah there? There was no mezuzah on the gates of Mezuzah. Rav Safra said to him, those gates are not the city gates. They are made as reinforcement to the fort of turrets above the gate, and therefore no mezuzah is required. And Abaye said to him, well, and shouldn't the fort of turrets itself require a mezuzah, since there is a residence of the prison guard in the fort? As wasn't a similar case taught in a baraisa? A synagogue in which there is a residence for the synagogue attendant, for the caretaker of the synagogue who lives there, it requires a mezuzah. So although no one lives in the synagogue itself, since the attendant lives in an adjacent room, the synagogue requires a mezuzah. So this is the old time, small synagogues, and there was like a little attached apartment to the synagogue where the caretaker would live. So he doesn't live in the synagogue itself, but because his residence opens into the synagogue, that would be a reason to attach the mezuzah to the synagogue. And here we have a note on the law of mezuzah in synagogue. A synagogue requires a mezuzah if someone lives there. Even if no one lives there, it is customary. It is a minhag, a custom. It is customary to affix a mezuzah on the doorpost, even though the synagogue is technically exempt. Rather, Abaye said the reason that no mezuzah was affixed to the gates of Mezuzah there was due to the danger involved. The gates of a city populated by Jews certainly require a mezuzah. However, since Gentiles live there as well, the danger is that the Gentiles would suspect the Jews of witchcraft or espionage. As it was taught in a baraisa, the mezuzah belonging to an individual is examined twice every 7 years to determine whether it was stolen or became disqualified. And in order to avoid excessive burden on the community, the mezuzah belonging to the public, like the city, the gates of a city, is examined only twice in a 50-year Jubilee period. The Jubilee came every 50 years, so they don't need to examine the public mezuzahs twice in 50 years. So this idea that the Gentiles might suspect us of witchcraft or espionage, I mean, what's going on there? And you can really hear that, okay, well, this town might have a majority of the people living in it, but the Jews in the nations in which we live in diaspora, right? And so this is like the Babylonian Jewish community. The Jews were a tiny minority of the Babylonians, just like, for example, the American Jews are a tiny minority of the American population. And if we start to do our rituals in public, right? So you can see here the caution and the fear of a Jewish population living in exile among vastly outnumbered by people who don't care, don't understand, just don't really have any insight into Jewish practice. And then when they see Jews doing their thing, they might be suspicious and think that these Jews are involved in some kind of a ritual that would hurt the surrounding population. And so, there was just a lot of practices that are cautious. I mean, it's almost like where we're more familiar with this idea was after the Inquisition in Spain, and some Jews went underground, the Marranos, right? So if they were going to light Shabbos candles, they could be killed for that. So they would, on Friday nights, they would lower all the curtains and seal them up tight and be extremely quiet and subtle and, hidden about any kind of Jewish practice that they did because it was so dangerous for them. But, that they didn't make that up, this idea that there could be danger from their neighbors. And so in terms of a mezuzah on a city gate, even if in a Jewish majority city, Okay, they put it up there and then nobody really notices it. We're not going to be, getting involved with examining it too often and drawing the attention of the non-Jewish population. Thank God we live now, for the most part, in a time and place, at least in the United States, where we can be really free to be ourselves and not worry so much. Although, last year or two, there's a rising amount of anti-Semitic incidents. So, caution, never a bad idea. And Rabbi Yehuda said there was an incident involving an examiner who was examining mezuzahs in the upper marketplace of Tzipori. So this is in the land of Israel, near the Sea of Galilee, the north of Israel, during the Roman occupation. And so there was a rabbi or a scribe who was checking mezuzahs. People would bring the mezuzah scrolls to him to see, are they still kosher? Have they been damaged? Is there anything wrong with them? And a Roman official found him and collected a fine of 1,000 zuz from him. Now, so what we see here is this is during one of those periods where the Roman occupation was very oppressive on the Jews, and they had decreed no Jewish practice, no Torah teaching in public, no Jewish ritual in public at all. So this guy who's, sort of putting a table in the marketplace and saying, bring your mezuzahs to me and I'll check them, is, publicly performing Jewish practice, Jewish customs, in a way that the Romans had ruled illegal. And he's lucky that he got away with a fine and not that he was imprisoned or executed. But this fine, 1,000 zuz for a scribe, it's an unbelievable amount of money, huge, certainly enough to bankrupt this poor fellow. So the Gemara raises a difficulty, but didn't Rabbi Elazar say that those on the path to perform a mitzvah are not susceptible to harm through the process of performing the mitzvah? Don't we have an extra measure of protection when we are involved in performing a mitzvah? And the Gemara responds, in a place where danger is permanent, it is different, as one should not rely on a miracle, as it is written with regard to God's command to Samuel, to Shmuel, the prophet, to anoint David as king in place of Shaul, in place of King Saul. So remember that it was Samuel who anointed Saul, but then Saul, misbehaved and lost his right to be king and to have the throne in his family. His son Jonathan would not become king after him. Rather, David would be elevated, and then the throne would never depart from the house of David. So God told Samuel, you will anoint David to be the king in Saul's place. The command came directly from God. But Samuel says to God, and Samuel said, how will I go? And Saul will hear and kill me, that I'm anointing a king to replace him. And God said, take in your hand a calf and say, I have come to offer a sacrifice to God. This is first book of Samuel, chapter 16:2. So even when God himself issues the command to do the mitzvah, right? Samuel was not just obeying a mitzvah he'd read about, he was obeying a direct command from God's own voice. And nevertheless, because there is a concern for danger that Saul will get wind of what Samuel is doing, anointing David, and God says to Samuel, not, don't worry about it, I'll protect you, but rather, take a calf with you that you're offering as a sacrifice in case anyone asks, and that's why you're going in this direction, and that's the job that you're doing, and then no one will bother you when you're anointing David to replace Saul. So our sages learned from that incident, yes, we get an extra measure of protection when we're involved in performing a mitzvah, but if you're going to, that's in terms of unknown dangers. But if you're going to be headed in the direction of a known danger, so don't do it, right? Don't do it. Don't, find a way to do it as risk-free as possible, because the fact that you're doing a mitzvah is not going to protect you from a known and avoidable danger. We do not rely on miracles. Anytime that we can avoid a danger, we must avoid the danger because life is precious. Rav Kahana taught a baraisa before Rav Yehuda. A storehouse for hay and a cattle barn and a woodshed and a storehouse are exempt from the obligation of mezuzah due to the fact that the women make use of them. And what is the meaning of the term make use? It means that the women bathe in them. Since women bathe there unclothed, it is inappropriate to affix a mezuzah there. And so that's why we don't put a mezuzah inside a house on the doorways to the bathroom, because women and men go in that place and get naked. So a place where people stand naked, there shouldn't be a scroll with God's name on it. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, the reason that there is no requirement to affix a mezuzah there is due to the fact that women bathe there. One can learn by inference that standard buildings of this kind, meaning a storehouse for hay or a cattle barn or a woodshed or a storehouse where women don't bathe, that they would therefore be exempt from the obligation of mezuzah. And is that true? Rather, the term should be understood in a different way. What is the meaning of the term make use? It means that the women adorn themselves there. And this is what the baraisa is teaching. Although these structures are solid, they're permanent structures, and they're clean, because we wouldn't put a mezuzah on a place of filth. And so they're solid and they are clean. To the extent that women adorn themselves in them, because women adorn themselves in them, they are exempt from the obligation of mezuzah since they are not residences. Right? So even though women make use of them in the way that you think they would make use of a residence, and therefore you might want to put a mezuzah on the hay loft or the barn or the storehouse, these kinds of places that are clearly not residences. If they're being used in a somewhat residential way, you might think that you should put a mezuzah on them, but in fact, you don't. Right? So Rav Kahana said to Rav Yehuda, but wasn't it taught in a different baraisa that a cattle stable is exempt from the obligation of mezuzah, and a barn in which women adorn themselves is obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah? So it would seem that the fact that it's used in this, more residential manner, it's used as a dressing room or a powder room, as it were, even though it's not normally used that way, the fact that it's used that way sometimes, maybe it does obligate that place in the obligation of putting a mezuzah on it. So rather, what have you to say that with regard to the requirement of mezuzah, the status of places where women adorn themselves is subject to a dispute between the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishna. Just as there are different opinions in that case, in my opinion, the status of the standard cattle barn is also subject to a dispute between the Tanaim, as it was taught in a baraisa that it is written, upon the doorposts of your house, meaning your house, that is designated as a residence, you are obligated in mezuzah, and this is to the exclusion of a storehouse for hay and a cattle barn and a woodshed and a storehouse, which are exempt from the mitzvah of mezuzah. And some obligate these structures in the mitzvah of mezuzah. Apparently, the rabbis dispute the requirement of affixing a mezuzah in a standard stable. So maybe whether women adorn themselves there or not, some rabbis held that we do put a mezuzah on a stable and some don't. But actually, they said there is a legal tradition that a building housing a bathroom, and a building housing a tannery, and a bathhouse, and a building housing a ritual bath for immersion, a mikvah, and any places of which women make use are exempt from the obligation of mezuzah. And this baraisa is inconsistent with the opinions of both Rav Kahana and Rav Yehuda. Therefore, Rav Kahana interprets the baraisa according to his line of reasoning, and Rav Yehuda interprets it according to his line of reasoning. In other words, Rav Kahana and Rav Yehuda disagree about which buildings require a mezuzah, and their disagreement sort of recalls an earlier disagreement of the rabbis of the Mishna, but it's not an exactly parallel disagreement. It's that nobody could agree on the laws of whether these buildings require mezuzah, and they're all bringing different reasons why they disagree. So Rav Kahana interprets it according to his line of reasoning. He says, Your house. You shall inscribe these words on the doorposts of your house, of your houses, and upon your gates, right? It's said to the plural, the population in plural. So your house means your house that is designated for your residence, to the exclusion of a storehouse for hay and a cattle barn and a woodshed and a storehouse, which are exempt from the obligation of mezuzah in a case where their use is standard and they are not used for bathing or other immodest acts. And some obligate these structures in the mitzvah of mezuzah in a case where their use is standard. So there were earlier rabbis who said, a storehouse for hay and a barn, you have to put a mezuzah on it, and others who said you don't put a mezuzah on it, irrespective of what they're used for. And some obligate these structures in the mitzvah of mezuzah in a case where their use is standard. In truth, they said the following with regard to a bathroom and a tannery and a bathhouse and a ritual bath for immersion, the mikvah, and any places of which women make use. And what is the meaning of the term make use? It is that women bathe there. These places are exempt from the obligation of mezuzah. So as we see, some of the earlier rabbis said, these kind of buildings, barns and storehouses, need a mezuzah. Other rabbis said they don't need a mezuzah. It would seem that the ones who said they need a mezuzah will then say, but they're exempt from mezuzah if people are getting naked in those buildings. They might have needed it otherwise, but now that people are undressing and bathing in those buildings, now it becomes inappropriate to put a mezuzah there. The Gemara challenges this interpretation. If so, that the words make use in this context refer to bathing, well, this is identical to the bathhouse. Why would the Baraisa need to list both a bathhouse and a place where women bathe? And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa teaches us the law with regard to the bathhouse of the public, and it teaches us the law with regard to the bathhouse of an individual. It could enter your mind to say, a bathhouse of the public, whose filth is extensive, is exempt from mezuzah. However, the bathhouse of an individual, whose filth is not extensive, as only women of that particular residence bathe there, I would say it is obligated in the mitzvah of affixing a mezuzah. Therefore, the Baraisa teaches us that the bathhouse of an individual is also exempt. Right? In the old days, people didn't have private bathrooms very often. Much more typical to go to the big bathhouse, where there's a lot of people getting naked and a lot of people cleaning themselves and a lot of filth accumulating in that water. Definitely not a place for a mezuzah. But you might have thought that in a private residence, a nice bathroom where only one person who lives there uses that bathroom, so it should, and maybe it was a separate building, right? A separate building near their house, but it's its own building, solid structure, permanent structure, and only one person goes in there to use it, but if they're going in there to use it for bathing, doesn't get a mezuzah. And Rav Yehuda interprets the Baraisa according to his own line of reasoning, and this is what it is teaching. Your house means your house that is designated for your residence, to the exclusion of a storehouse for hay and a cattle barn and a woodshed and a storehouse, which are exempt from the mitzvah of mezuzah, even in a case where women use it for adorning themselves inside. And some obligate these structures in the mitzvah of mezuzah in a case where women adorn themselves there. However, in a case where use of the building is standard, everyone agrees that these structures are exempt from the mitzvah of mezuzah. In truth, they said that a bathroom and a tannery and a bathhouse and a ritual bath for immersion, the mikvah, even though women adorn themselves there, are exempt from the obligation of mezuzah because of the filth that piles up in these places. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rav Yehuda, in cases where use of the building is standard, does everyone agree that a storehouse is exempt from the mitzvah of mezuzah? But wasn't it taught in a Baraisa that it is written with regard to the mitzvah to affix a mezuzah? And upon your gates, meaning that with regard to the gates of houses and the gates of courtyards and the gates of cities and the gates of towns and a barn and chicken coops and a hay storehouse and wine storehouses and oil storehouses, all of them are obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah. Isn't it so? I might have thought that I include in the obligation of mezuzah even a gatehouse used to guard the entrance to a courtyard, or a portico, or an open porch, and a balcony serving as a corridor to several residences. And therefore, the verse states, house. Just as a house is a place that is designated for residence and is obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah, so too all similar structures are obligated, and this is to the exclusion of those structures that are not designated for residence, right? It's really a residence that creates the obligation to put a mezuzah. Storehouses for, crops and animals is not a residence for humans, and therefore they're not going to be obligated in the mezuzah. Now, I might have thought that I include in the obligation of mezuzah even a bathroom, and a tannery, and a bathhouse, and a ritual bath for immersion. Therefore, the verse states, house. Just as a house is a place that is designated to honor the people who enter it, so too all places that are designed to honor those who enter are obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah, excluding those structures that are not designed to honor. So therefore, what is the law? A bathroom, a bathhouse, and a tannery are exempt from the mitzvah of mezuzah because they are not designed to honor those who enter them. That is the law. Now, I might have thought that I include in the obligation of mezuzah even the Temple Mount. Now we're back to the Temple Mount and its chambers and courtyards. Therefore, the verse states, house. Just as a house is a place that is non-sacred, so too any place that is non-sacred and residential is obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah, excluding those places that are sacred. For the purposes of this discussion, the Baraisa teaches that there are sages who hold that barns and storehouses whose use is standard require a mezuzah, contrary to the opinion of Rav Yehuda, that everyone agrees that these structures are exempt. Consequently, the Baraisa is a conclusive refutation of his opinion and is a support for the contention of Rav Kahana that this matter is the subject of a debate among the earlier sages. I'm almost done, so if you got questions or comments, get them in. The sages taught in a baraisa, a synagogue, a woman's house, and a house jointly owned by partners are all obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah, in the obligation of mezuzah. And the Gemara asks, that's obvious. Why would these structures be exempt? Lest you say that it is written, your house in the masculine, right? Beisecha. So it's talking about the Hebrew, the syntax of the Hebrew is in your houses, and the your is actually got a masculine component to it. So your house is in the masculine, and therefore you might have thought to exclude houses that belong to women because it's not in the feminine. But your house in the singular and not their house, excluding a jointly owned house. Therefore, the Baraisa teaches us that those houses are obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah like all others. And say it is indeed so that a woman's house and a jointly owned house are exempt. Maybe that is the case. And the Gemara rejects this possibility. Immediately following the mitzvah of mezuzah is the reward for its fulfillment, as the verse states, so that your days be numerous as well as the days of your sons. Right, so the obligation to put a mezuzah on the doorposts of your house is stated twice in Deuteronomy. In that first paragraph, at the end of the paragraph, and then in the second paragraph, it's restated. So in one case singular, in the other case plural. In the second paragraph, it's followed by the reward, so that your days be numerous as well as the days of your children, so that you and your children shall live long in the land. If these structures were exempt from the mitzvah, the question would arise, do these men and individuals require long life? But those, meaning women or houses owned by multiple partners, that they don't require long life? Of course, everybody requires long life. And therefore, the mitzvah of mezuzah clearly applies to all of them. So the Gemara then asks, rather, why do I need the emphasis of the verse, your house, if every house is obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah? And the Gemara answers, this could be understood in accordance with the opinion of Rava. As Rava said, Your house is interpreted to mean that the mezuzah is placed in the way that you enter the house, and when a person lifts his foot to begin walking, he lifts his right foot first. Therefore, the mezuzah is affixed on the right side of the doorway. So here you have the source for the law that when you install a mezuzah on the doorposts of your house, it's on the right side as you enter the house. The mezuzah is placed on the right side of the doorway as one enters a house. Placement of a mezuzah on the left side is invalid whether or not the owner is left-handed. So the fact that most people, apparently, when they start walking, they start with their right foot, and this was the reasoning for putting the mezuzah on the right side of the doorway as you enter. At any rate, it doesn't matter if you're left-handed. The mitzvah is established that when you install a mezuzah, it's on the right side of the doorway as you enter, right? As you enter the house, not as you leave it. And that is where we're going to pause for today. So let us go to your comments and questions. Okay. All right. Elvis, when you cited the prohibition against being a gossip monger, which I said at the top of the show, I was reminded of the 6 or 8 daily remembrances where we recall how God punished Miriam for speaking out of turn about Moses to their brother Aaron. If Miriam could stumble in this regard, the great and holy Miriam, who was a prophet in her own right, and a hero of the Jewish people, and yet even she stumbled in this regard, right, of being a gossip monger. So if Miriam could stumble in this regard, how much more should we be on guard against this? At least Miriam was forgiven, healed, and brought back into the camp, but not immediately, right? Moses prayed on her behalf. She committed this sin of gossiping about Moses and the situation with his wife. And then she was struck with tsaras, right? With the biblical leprosy, that skin condition, that's a physical manifestation of a spiritual malady. And that's actually one of the important sources for this connection between lashon hara, right, wicked speech, and the outbreak on the skin, not modern eczema, but ancient tsaras. Right? And then Moses prayed on her behalf that she should be healed. And God said to Moses, then she will be healed. But she's going to have to go through a period of separation. I think it was a week long before she could re-enter the camp and be pure again and be part of the community again. Right? So gossip mongering is considered a very, very serious sin. And people who do it deserve to be separated from the community. And Elvis, beautiful Kal Vachomer you made. If even Miriam, who was such a high and exalted spiritual level, could stumble in this regard, how much more we who are just regular people need to be extra cautious not to stumble in this regard. Beautifully stated. Michael, gossiping was remedied by killing one bird and set another one free. Take flight with kindness while slaughtering lashon hara. Very good. So he's talking about the purification process of one who had contracted tsaras, right? And so there was this one part of that purification process was bringing 2 birds, right? One is slaughtered, one is released. And Michael's making a beautiful spiritual lesson out of the 2 birds. Tom, there are customs that become all but obligatory. For example, the evening prayer, right? So we were talking about the fact that putting a mezuzah on a synagogue is not an obligation, but it has become customary. It has acquired the strength of a minhag, of a custom, but not just a custom, a custom. The capital C is what Tom is saying. And so, for example, whereas when the temple was destroyed and we could no longer bring the daily offerings, there was a daily offering in the morning and a daily offering in the afternoon. So then the rabbis instituted that the daily prayers would substitute for the daily offerings. So we have an obligation to pray in the morning, and we have an obligation to pray in the afternoon, just as we were obligated to bring the morning offering and the afternoon offering when the temple stood. But there was no nighttime offering. So the question, and we talked about this in Tractate Brachas, is are the evening prayers obligated or not? But from a very, very long time ago, they became, customary, and a custom that became so deeply rooted that it has the full strength of an obligation. Some say that it absolutely is an obligation. Others say, technically it's a custom, but everyone agrees that, an adult Jewish man is obligated to pray 3 times a day, even though we're only replacing the morning and afternoon offerings, now have obligation to pray morning, afternoon, and evening. And finally, Yosef says, this stringency on gossip might also have to do with those who were informers to Rome, betraying confidence to escape from martyrdom. I would agree with you that there's many really good reasons not to be a gossip monger, but the commandment, don't be a gossip monger, is from way before the birth of Rome. It's in the Torah that was given 3,300 years ago at Mount Sinai, many centuries before Rome was born. Nevertheless, in terms of this fear of, sort of taking our business outside the tribe, as it were, and what a wickedness that is, to be a talebearer in that way, to be an informer is like the lowest of the low, right? In terms of what Rashi is saying, what a gossip monger is in the Torah, it's even more just on that personal level, right? Just that I'm going to listen to what's going on in my neighbor's house. I'm going to run over to my other neighbor and say, did you hear what Tom and Jane are doing over there? Even on that personal level, it's a big sin. But, if you take that to the next level where you're actually going to endanger your family, your tribe, your community, your people by running out and informing on them to curry favor for yourself with the ruling authority, that's just the lowest of the low, right? The lowest of the low. Sharon, many of the offices I have worked at have mezuzahs. They are not places of residence, but they are owned by Orthodox Jews. Is this also based on tradition versus halacha? I was talking to Rabbi Blau, Mechi Blau, who teaches the Daf Yomi Shir here at Eitz Chaim, about this very question. And I asked him that, what about offices? Is that just custom, or is there a bigger obligation? He says, no, that's obligated. So I said, but it's not a residence, right? You don't sleep there. He says, maybe you only have very interesting meetings at your office, but I get some really boring people, and I will doze in my office from time to time. So, all kidding aside, the fact is, if it's your office, you do have the ability to take a nap there. Moreover, you keep your own personal possessions there. It's not a storehouse for hay, which benefits the animals. Since you keep your own possessions in the office, it is considered some kind of extension of your residence. And so you are obligated to put that mezuzah there. I have to do a little bit more research on it, but that was the impression I got from Rabbi Blau this morning. And finally, Carolyn, last question for today. Can a person who is not Jewish and visiting touch the mezuzah, or is that impolite? What a great question, right? It is inappropriate to put a mezuzah on your house if you're not Jewish, right? It's an obligation of Jews to put a mezuzah on their house. And it is inappropriate for a non-Jew to, actually install a mezuzah on their house, because not only are they not obligated to do it, it also becomes a marker of a Jewish home, and that's not a Jewish home. But this question is beautiful. So Carolyn's saying, okay, I'm not Jewish. I go to a Jewish person's house, and I see that when they enter the house, they touch the mezuzah and then kiss their hand. Now, this touching and kissing, that is not a legal obligation. That is only a custom for sure. Is there a nice lesson to be learned from that out of respect that a non-Jew could do? I mean, I don't know the answer to this question. I really don't. I know that I have taught that when we do that, it shouldn't be a mindless, touch it and kiss it, right? But we should actually learn a lesson from it because there's that shin on the outside, the first letter of God's name, and we should remember to shh. That's the sound of the shin. We should remember to, be quiet as we enter a house and not come in and venting about our problems, but just go in and get the temperature of the room, as it were, the emotional temperature of the room. People inside might have had a tough day, and so before you come in and unload your burdens on them, just be ready to be there for the people that you're now going to be, united with or reunited with. And that lesson would seem to apply equally well to anybody, Jew or not Jew. So I don't know. I mean, on the other, I guess a counter argument would be, yeah, but if you do that, you're really acting like a Jew, and people might see you and misunderstand and think you're Jewish, and then see you do other behaviors, and it would be confusing. So I can't just say yes, but it's a great question. Well, that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, with God's help, we'll be doing page 12 here in Tractate Yoma at our Friday time, noon Pacific, as we're getting ready for Shabbos. My pals, you should have a great and healthy and inspiring evening. All the best.